You're listening to Why We Save, a podcast about the real reasons we do or don't save and the barriers people face along the way. I'm Isabel, and across this series, we'll be reframing how we think about saving and how we can make it work better for everyone. Most savings products are designed for the typical saver, someone with regular paydays, predictable bills, and a bit of extra cash left at the end of the month. But here's the thing, for millions of people, that isn't reality. In this episode, we're asking, what if our saving system was built for real people and real lives rather than an ideal customer who barely exists? Today, joining me and Andrew is Lauren Peel, a senior partner at Inclusive Outcomes. Lauren is an expert in designing products that put people, real people, at the heart and start of the process. She's worked with organisations across the UK to create fairer, more accessible financial services, and is passionate about rethinking how we define vulnerability, especially for those who've been left out or let down by the system. Right, welcome Lauren. Thanks for joining us on Why We Save. So could you just introduce yourself a little bit and tell our listeners about what you do?
Yeah, so my name's Lauren Peel. Thank you for having me. I lead a business called Inclusive Outcomes. What we do is we help organisations, mostly financial services, to design better products and services that work for all customers. So when we say all customers, that might be people with disabilities, people with low financial resilience, kind of thinking about who products and services might not be designed for today and how can we make that better.
Could you tell us a bit more about what you mean by the typical customer?
Absolutely. So when, imagine you're working a building society or a bank and, you've got a product design team and they're thinking about, we've got a target market. So there's the first jargony phrase. We've got a target market of 30 to 40-year-old people who own their own homes, for example. And so they have a clear view of who the target market is. And then we put this fantasy person in the target market, the typical customer, the rational customer. So that's a person, if I put it back to me, kind of typical rational Lauren is someone who, when a letter comes through from my provider, I open it quite quickly and I read it in full and I understand it. Real Lauren is, that goes on the pile for some time in the future where I think, I've got 5 minutes now, I'll open that and have a quick look. Typical rational Lauren might be someone who, opens the Couch to 5K plan and then sticks to it and becomes like, I've done it and I've done my 3 days a week and I'm really, that's designed for someone who can do that. Reality Lauren has never finished the Couch to 5K program. So we have this kind of typical person who always has the time to engage with kind of what comes out and to make choices and has the time to go, okay, well, I need a savings product. Let me look at is what might be best for me. It doesn't take into account that people are busy, have different levels of understanding, might be managing quite complex, emotional things at home. We can all experience things like ill health ourselves, of family members, bereavements, different issues with children being bullied at school that you're trying to manage. These are things that take up a lot of cognitive space and brain space. So when teams are designing products and services, they shouldn't just be thinking about there's typical rational Lauren who's got time and is super engaged and is going to make the right decision based only on rational kind of financial factors. We need to almost imagine who is that customer at their most complex point when their lives are really difficult, when they're trying to do the right thing, but the reality of life and also just how different brains function can get in the way. And that's why it's really important to involve different groups of people and different customers and think, what works for Lauren won't work for Isabel, won't work for Andrew. We've got to make it tailored. We can't design something so it works for every single person differently, but we can understand enough about different groups and their needs to make it so it can be tailored. And so there's different ways of accessing things so it works for more people.
And so inclusive outcomes, what do we mean by inclusive outcomes? Yeah,
it's a great question because I think it's very financial services based language. So there's two parts to the name inclusive outcomes. I'll start with outcomes. Our regulator in financial services, the Financial Conduct Authority, really wants all firms, banks, building societies, insurers, etc., to deliver good outcomes for customers. And that's the language they use. How do we deliver good outcomes for customers? And one of the challenges might be that some customers are getting good outcomes, but some aren't, and particularly people with different needs, perhaps more complex circumstances. So we have the outcomes side of it. And then inclusive is that not everyone is getting good outcomes today. Some people are getting worse outcomes than others. How do we make that inclusive so everyone, from every part of society, from every background, every type of income, every level of experience can get good outcomes from the products and services that they're interacting with?
And it would be easy to think that this is a kind of niche issue with just small segments in society, but the Financial Conduct Authority that you mentioned do research, and they've found that nearly half the UK population have some form of vulnerability. So it's actually a mass market issue, isn't it?
Yeah, so half of people, you're totally right, half of people with a vulnerability characteristic. Vulnerability is very much the regulator word for it. I think it's probably the word that lots of us within the industry, but also as individuals, wouldn't use. I would never call myself vulnerable. I would say, I just need a bit of help with this, or a bit of support with something. So half of people with a vulnerability characteristic, that can include health and disability, often the one people think about the most, but it can also include, we use a term, negative life events. So that might be, I've recently got divorced and I now need to kind of manage my pension differently, or I need to understand my savings more because I've not done that myself before, or it could be things like economic abuse that people have experienced. So there's a really broad definition of customers in vulnerable circumstances is the phrase that we often use, and thinking about what that means for different people and kind of the support that they might need from different providers.
And I think the characteristic that is most common is the lack of financial resilience, and that obviously a key part of that is low levels or no savings, which is something that's really important for Savings Week campaign.
Yeah, and two parts that really go together. If we were making it into a Venn diagram, there'd be a lot of overlap about low financial resilience, so no savings or very limited savings, so kind of struggling to respond to shocks or changes in income. The other side being low financial capability. So about half of UK adults have got low numeracy skills. And I think if you are someone with low numeracy skills, it's easy to think, either feel ashamed or shy about saying that because actually, the perception that everyone else is better, or that actually you think everyone's the same. So when we can receive information about, savings or other products, and we see a sheet full of numbers, if you're not confident in that, that really puts people off. So I think it's really important when firms are working on communications or products or services, thinking about half of adults, 1 in 2 people, have got low numeracy skills. People are not confident when it comes to numbers. How can we make things really simple so people aren't comparing a huge page full of interest rates that don't mean anything if you're not used to seeing that? So all things like this are all about how can we make things better for different groups of people.
And is that what we mean when we talk about outcomes?
So I think good outcomes can mean different things to different people.
That's where I'm going. We could unpick that a bit.
So a good outcome for some people who want to, let's say you want to really make the most of your savings. You've got some savings and it's really important to you to make the most from it. A good outcome might be that you get the best interest rate you possibly can, and that is your real motivator. Another good outcome for a different group might be perhaps older customer groups, perhaps people who struggle digitally and struggle, maybe don't have a smartphone or struggle to use it. A good outcome for them might be, I really like going to a branch. I like going into a branch where someone can help me. And actually, I don't mind as much if the interest rate isn't the highest, because I would rather go somewhere where I feel confident and I feel supported than shop around online for something that I don't feel as certain about. So one of the things we think is really important is that all firms, including building societies, understand what's important to their customers and then think about that when they're designing products and services.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a difficult balance to strike, isn't it? I think especially with branches and digital and trying to make sure that you've got that right balance, especially in today's world. I think, are there types of financial services that you think do that better than others?
I think it's all about offering a mix for people. I think, there are providers who are digital only, and that's fine because that's their target market. They are there to serve people who only really want to use digital. I guess I worry that we are on a path to For most people, digital is fine. You know, I manage all of my finances digitally. I'm sure you both do. That is fine for the majority of people, but that means the people who it's challenging for, you know, their options are running out. So there are, you know, there's not many new branches opening. Building societies play an important role, as do credit unions, because they are still often the only branch in town, the only place you can go for help. And actually, when we do customer research, I also hear young people saying, even though they manage everything digitally, when something goes wrong, they want to speak to someone. Again, that low confidence, low capability. They want to know on the day that something goes wrong, even if it's just a phone number, that they can call up and go, actually, I don't understand this. Can you talk me through that? So there's that digital most of the time. How do we make sure there's access when people need extra help and support?
Yeah, there are a few things that you mentioned there that I think would be really interesting to look into more. So you talked about picking up the phone. You talked about vulnerability. Could we talk a little bit about types of vulnerability and how even the best digital journey for somebody like you who manages your finances digitally might not be the best for somebody in that boat?
Yeah, so, you know, as I've already said, there's lots of different kinds of vulnerability characteristic, and I'm saying that because it's not, you know, we would prefer to say people have got different needs. Mm-hmm. And actually it's the kind of the system that's not working for them. So there's something about how do we make the digital journeys better when things go wrong. So I was on a customer research project recently speaking to a deaf woman she'd had a fraud incident on her account and she was trying to resolve it. And she would have been very happy to resolve that online. And what she had to do was phone up and do it. And she said, I can't phone up. So she had to go into a branch. The person in the branch had to make a phone call on her behalf and still pass her the phone to confirm the verification. Gosh. So we're in this journey of, well, actually, you know what, I'm here. She said to me, I was there in the branch, I had my passport, I could prove it was me. I still had to be made to speak to someone on the phone. And as a deaf customer, that's not helpful because she can hear enough to kind of get the gist of things, but not to hear every single word and pick it up. So for her, that was a real challenge.
Must have been quite humiliating as well, I'd imagine, for somebody in that position.
Yeah, and I'm speaking on behalf of someone else, but in this story she was telling me, she said, you know, often she has to ask her elderly parents for help with it. And she said, on the one hand, yeah, it's you know, they're getting older, so, you know, they might have their own kind of needs, their own levels of kind of issues with hearing or issues with understanding. But she also said, I don't really want them to know that I've had a fraud, you know, and in the same way, asking for help with other things. Let's say it wasn't fraud where you are a victim. Let's say you'd done something wrong yourself, as we all, you know, sometimes you miss a payment, sometimes, you know, you've picked the wrong products, these things happen. She was having to go and ask for help from other people and involve them in her financial affairs because the journeys weren't working for her. And phone was particularly bad. I think she said if she could either do it digitally or do it in branch and face-to-face and kind of read lips while she was doing it with it, that's fine. It was this moving people back to phone that was a challenge for her.
So as a consumer, kind of, as you said, people don't go around saying, I've got this vulnerability. That's not the way people think about themselves. What can they expect, particularly if they've got some of these characteristics that the regulator identifies, like low financial capability or low resilience or a health condition? Kind of what should be the consumer's expectation when they go and speak to or interact with a financial service provider?
So financial services providers are now do have to offer additional support, and people may have seen on websites that they use or when they're speaking on the phone to their providers, they may hear language like, do you have any additional support needs? Do you have anything you want to tell us about? So there's a real push for firms to understand their customers in this way and collect this information so that they can offer help, so that they can do something differently. So my first thing I'd say is if people have got needs that they think, actually, I could do with things in large print, or I could do with people talking more slowly to me on the phone. There's quite a wide range of support that's available to people. So don't be afraid to ask if you have things that you think, actually, this could be more helpful for me. So there's kind of the asking for help. We've also got challenges around, I think, trust is a big one. So why would I tell someone this information? This is personal information about me. What do I expect my provider to do about it? Mm-hmm. Do I feel that they'll use this information? How do I know what help I'll get? And we were speaking to a different customer last week who's really visually impaired. so kind of almost blind. We spoke to her over the phone for a project, and she's not told anyone that she's severely visually impaired. But in her mind, she's like, this is just my life, and I'm visually impaired, and she'd learned to navigate it. And we said to her, well, why don't you tell? I said, well, surely you get letters through. What do you do? Letters come through the post. What do you do about that? And she says, oh, my husband reads them out to me. So she'd not told anyone. None of her banks, none of her building societies, none of her insurance or pension providers knew. And I think, if something happens to her husband, she's kind of in the position where she can't access this information. So we've got...
People have all these coping mechanisms that they've
learned to live with it. Yeah. And if you'd spoke to her, she would say, oh, I don't need help, because she's learnt to manage it. She's got solutions in place. It never occurred to her. It's not my provider's business. This is people see their needs as very different to what's on offer. So on the one hand, how can we make it so people feel like they know what their provider will do, they know what the building society or the credit union will do, but on the other hand, that we need to keep building trust and keep making it really clear that it's easier to talk about for health conditions. If it's that you don't feel confident, it might be, can I have a longer phone call instead of having a rushed meeting or a rushed phone call? Can I have time to talk to someone? I just need to make sure that I understand something. Some of these kind of slightly, whether we call them hidden vulnerabilities or invisible ones, how do we? It might be things like ADHD. If you struggle to focus, letting someone know to say, actually, can you just help me understand that, or can you explain this to me in a way so it's more clear? How do we design things differently so they work for more groups of people?
I think what you said about trust and building trust with your financial services provider, but then also people around you. I mean, so as you said, some people don't always have that help that they can go to. Should people have to ask, and should people have to disclose that sort of level of personal information to their building society or credit union? It feels very personal.
And I think that's the big question. I think we're from a financial services perspective, I think we're still in a point in time where it is about needing customers to tell you information so that you can do something differently. Now, that's very different to where we were 10 years ago. We are in a better place. There's an ideal state, an end state, where everything is so well designed that actually you don't need to tell them. So, you don't need to tell them that you're visually impaired, that you're blind, because actually you can just request things in different formats automatically. And websites are, well designed for screen readers from the start. You don't have to ask for help, because it's been thought about in the design stages and in the delivery stages. Now, I think we have got a long way to go on that. Some places are better than others, but I think we're starting from a place where things have been designed for a really kind of typical customer group for so long that there's going to be some work to do to thinking about different groups.
And can we unpick that a little bit? I think we were having a conversation before this about what a journey that could be quite confusing or overwhelming for somebody could look like. How can financial services make that better? And could you think of examples of where it doesn't look right and maybe an end state of what looks better than that?
Yeah, so thinking about, the people who are designing products and services in firms are really brilliant at what they do and really clever and really understand those products. And that means it can be quite hard to put ourselves in the shoes of people who don't understand that all the time. And so there's something about having diverse teams, bringing in people with different levels of experience, different skills, so you've got different ways of thinking within your organisation. And then there is a big customer research element to it. So, if you don't know the answers to how someone with ADHD or autism might interact with your product, if you don't know how someone who struggles with maybe dyslexia or dyscalculia, if you don't know how they'd interact with your product, ask. Do the finding out. It sounds really simple and it does add time to things, but we need to understand what different people's experiences are like. And, before coming on to this, I was kind of doing a bit of research, as you'd expect, and I went on one building society website, and it's just in cash ISAs alone, which is a really common product. We would think of it as really well known and really well understood. This one building society had 13 different cash ISAs. various, flavours of fixed versus not fixed, length of fix, amount you could put in. And I was looking at that and thinking, blimey, if you don't know anything about ISAs and you've got some money and it might be the first time you've had an amount of money where you think, right, this is enough to move it from my current account, it's enough to save. That's really overwhelming when you look at those options, and all the interest rates are quite similar, but there was no filtering, there was kind of no triage. I think I've heard customers before say, I know that what I want is a product where I've got this much money and I want something that can do something like this, whether that's I want it to make the most money, or I want it, it's really important to me that I can access it at any time. How can we ask customers maybe, I don't know, 1 to 3, maybe no more than 4 questions? Mm-hmm. That means we go from 13 to it's these 2. Don't look at 13 when you're struggling to make sense of it and you've got a complex life and you struggle with decision making. Let us help with that decision, because actually there's only 2 products that really meet your needs.
Yeah, I guess the providers offer these different products to meet different needs and different segments of consumers. So you've got that tension between a range, but it's how you communicate that range to satisfy and meet the most appropriate needs of the individual customers they're coming to you.
Yeah, having the range is really nice because, like you said, we want to help different groups of people. We've designed this product for people like this, and we've designed this product for people like this. But when you land on the website with 13, you're probably only one of those groups of customers. So how can we make it easy for people to make decisions? People have got really complex, unpredictable lives. I think it's easy to think when we're designing products that when people are choosing a savings product or any product, they've got plenty of time. They're sat in a nice, quiet room. They've got a cup of tea, and they're really 100% focused on exploring those options. We know the reality from our own life,
and the understanding to be able to. Yeah,
they understand it, and if they don't understand it, they've got time to think about it. I'm sure the reality in my life and in your own lives is, blimey, I've forgotten that I needed to do that. What's the quickest way I can do it? And I'm a financially confident person, so I could go, right, I've got 10 minutes now, I'll just do it on my phone and figure it out. If that's not you, those things are still people that can put things off almost.
So it's not just the characteristics of vulnerability the regulator identifies, it's the whole life context that people have as well.
Yeah, it's almost just, we just call it real life, I guess.
Real
life.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated and busy, and there's all sorts of things that can make it more busy. And then if you add vulnerability characteristics on top, or even, I probably prefer to just say real life.
Yeah.
There are people who maybe, we wouldn't say have a vulnerability characteristic in the kind of the regulator sense, but maybe they work 0 hours contracts, so their income changes quite a lot every week and month to month, or, they're single parents and kind of are reliant on, different kinds of child support that comes in, and that can be unpredictable, and they don't have the support network. Because you've done a lot of work on different segments of consumers in the past, haven't you, and particularly ones in different challenging circumstances, and they particularly don't have very high levels of savings often. Yeah, and you're spot on. That's why it's important to look beyond kind of a single customer group. So if we're doing a single customer group view, we're talking about 1 in 10 UK adults with no savings, which is still a lot. 1 in 10 is over 6 million people with no savings, which sounds like a lot already. And then you say, okay, but for people who are digitally excluded, so people who might not have a smartphone, might not have the internet, that's 4 in 10 of that group. So it's 4 times as many for people who are digitally excluded. For people with poor numeracy skills, as we've already touched on, 3 in 10 don't have any savings. And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking about poor numeracy skills and thinking we're talking about 1 in 10 with none, 4 in 10 when it comes to digitally excluded, 3 in 10 for people with poor numeracy skills. It's 27%, so 1 in 4 single parents who've got no savings. So, we can talk about the no savings problem overall, but then from my perspective, I'd say, who does that impact the most? So who's really struggling to build savings, and how do we design things for them? How do we have those kind of hardest to serve groups in mind? Because if we design for them, it will work for other people as well.
And are there specific examples you can think of how we could design particularly a savings product? Because in many ways, they're quite straightforward. You can open them with £1. As you say, you can go into a branch and say, here's £1, I'll open my savings product, without much, very low requirements for ID checks and so on. So they are seemingly straightforward. How can we make it more tailored for specific groups? Are there any good examples that you've worked on or seen?
I think there's some emotional parts to saving that we, maybe don't take into account when we're thinking about the kind of day-to-day, like the product design and the interest rates and how it works. Think, like, what's the emotional part of it,
And those are probably before you get to designing the product, aren't they?
Yes.
It's the decision to even save at all or not.
Yes, and if you're someone who doesn't have savings today, or you've got very low levels of savings, we can see things about, people talk about wanting to save, deposit for a house. We know that feels overwhelming for millions of people. The amounts of it are so high. If you've got £50, £100 today and you think I need 20,000, that gap, it almost feels impossible to overcome and to get there. So there's something about, okay, when we're thinking about people with no savings, what's the incentives? The incentives on £50, £100 of saving is not a 4% interest rate, because it kind of doesn't, it doesn't really mean much. You think, well, what's that £2 or £4 going to do for me? How do we tap into what people are saving for? And that can be a range of things. We say people should have the kind of an emergency shock buffer, and it's really important to have that. That's the thing that can stop you turning to credit on a time when you need it, or kind of makes it more easier to smooth that out for things like school uniforms, washing machines breaking. Now that's important. It's also not very easy to get excited about if you think kind of I'm doing this for when things go wrong. Some of the successful things we've seen are around where providers offer savings pots. So kind of, that's my, for me, it would be like, that's my money for gig tickets. So when the next big show comes around, I'm saving that money up for it. So I'm not going to get, I'm not going to miss that out. For other people, I've heard things where on an app you can build a savings pot, and people had put pictures of their children on the front cover, and it was like, this is the money for my kids. This is not my money. This is for them when they get to this age, or it's so I can take them on holiday. And that was the thing that stopped people dipping into it. It was almost the barrier of like, it wasn't there. It wasn't almost their money anymore. It's like, that's my kids' money. It's my kids' faces on there, and it's for them. And there's like little things that we can do that kind of help with the emotional side of building up savings.
I think my kids think all of my money is theirs. That's different.
You need to put your face on there.
And
and then there's some products that we've seen. So some of the credit unions who do often serve kind of people with low resilience or people on lower incomes, they have repay and save mechanisms. So, you maybe got a loan, and the loan payment is, whatever it is back, and they'll say, well, round it up to the nearest, the nearest £10, the nearest £100, and then that bit goes into a savings. And it sounds like little amounts, but if you've got nothing, that really adds up. If you've never had savings and suddenly you've built up £50, that £50 is a lot, at Christmas or at a birthday or at another time, and you think, wow, now we can afford to do something small and nice, but that we never would have been able to do before. So I think designing for people with no or small levels of savings is a gap, and it's something that can make a real difference for people.
How do financial services do that, though? I mean, you touched upon doing research, outreach, but I mean, some of these organisations are absolutely huge. They've got lots of different parts to them, lots of different teams. Where would they even start to go and understand what somebody with vulnerable characteristics looks like, to be able to start that, to design that journey from the beginning?
So I guess the good thing, if you're a massive firm, the good thing is, or let's say a big bank or a big building society, the good thing is they have got budgets to do this kind of work. So we do a lot of customer research with different groups. We're always speaking to different groups of people about what's it like. Tell us what works for you, what's not working. So getting that understanding, I think you can also just look at things like complaints data and complaints insight. Kind of if you're a bank, building society, whoever. Say, there will be ways for us to find out where problems are in our journey. It could be complaints. It could be, the number of people who start an application form and drop off of it. You kind of can look at things and go, there's a problem there. And then when you've spotted a problem, let's not just solve it in the way that we think it should be solved. Because, say if I was doing it, I could think, well, the solution to that is this, because that's what I think it should look like. You've got to involve different people in in that journey, because how I solve it for me might not be the same as, you know, how it would work for you or for you. You know, you've got to think about different things work for different people.
Yeah.
And I think what I've always found really persuasive from kind of designing for people with specific needs is how that leads to innovations in processes and change that actually makes it easier for everyone. So you're actually reducing barriers for that specific need, but you're actually reducing barriers for the mass market as well, and making it a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a really kind of a non-financial services example, but one that's really common when we talk about inclusive design, is about step-free access. So we're in London at the moment. You know, all of the tubes have got steps up and down. There's steps everywhere for transport. And you say, okay, well, we need to fix this. People in wheelchairs can't use this. How do we fix it? You put ramps in place, and then it's not just people who are wheelchair users who benefit. It's also people with pushchairs.
Yeah.
It's people with heavy luggage. It's people, you know,
looking at their phone, walking along, and don't trip over the step.
So we talk about this inclusive design as if you design generally when you design it for one group, there's really broad benefits. So if I think about that, bringing it back to savings, okay, so maybe it's a long application form on your website, you know, because you need to collect information and you need to do an ID check and there's various different things. You know, if you're someone with ADHD who maybe struggles to concentrate and focus for long periods of time, that is a problem. Filling that in is a problem. We also did some research. I spoke to a young woman with MS who says she gets fatigued really easily. So for her, processes that were long, particularly if it was on a small screen, and she was doing it on her phone, was really challenging and really draining. So there's different, although you can look at one group and say, you know, these people have this characteristic, so we have to design for that. If you do it well, it benefits lots of other people. And at the end of the day, even people without characteristics, you know, we were talking about people with busy lives, even if they're not kind of...
Much prefer a short
it's
form.
just like, I just need it to be easy. You know, you design it to make it simpler for everyone. Make sure you're not leaving anyone behind in that process. But then it works better for everyone, and it should save the provider kind of time and money as well.
Yeah, great example.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are some questions that we quite like to ask every guest at the end of each episode. One's a bit more serious and one's a bit more fun, frivolous. Which one do you want to start with?
Fun and frivolous.
So what's the first thing you remember saving for?
So I think I can remember a first money habit, which then turned into that little bit of savings. So when I was a teenager, in my town, there was a local gig night every Wednesday, and we used to get the bus in, get the bus home. It was £4 for the gig, and the bus was like something like £2.50, and my parents would give me £10 every week to go. So then I could think, okay, well, I've paid for the gig, I've paid for the bus, and now I've got this extra little bit, and either I can buy a pop or I can save that money. I can just drink water and I can save that. And then like, my parents aren't going to ask me for that money back. They've given me the £10 to go to this. So there was that first, I could save these, and then when I go to town late, like if I go on a Saturday at the end of the month, I'll be able to get, you know, whatever I want. I've not spent it all at once. So that was the first little bit of, kind of, and it was different because it was cash and we were like 15. And you go, okay, yeah, there's something here where I can now use this for something bigger. So that almost first little putting it to one side into a different part of my purse, or like a different pot, helped me think about building that up over time.
And do you remember what that something bigger was?
Honestly, it was probably going to another gig. I think that's the problem. So there was gigs were midweek, and then we used to go to town on a Saturday as well, and do things. It would have either been that, or it would have been a CD, or it probably would have been one of my friends who hadn't done that, not having enough bus fare to get home. I think it's probably the reality of what it would have been.
Very charitable of you.
Yeah, and also had the benefit of doing one over on your parents as well. And,
Maybe that was their goal. Maybe that's what they were trying to do.
They built that savings habit. And that was a time when bus fares were much cheaper as well. So the concept of going to a gig and your bus fare and having some change left over out of a tenner is probably not very common anymore.
And then the more serious one. So if you could wave a magic wand to make it easier for people in the UK to save, what would it be?
Can I have two magic wands?
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So I think there's a difference between people who people who aren't saving, they've got the money to save and they're not saving, and there's people who can't save, right? So, and I think it's a really important distinction. For people who can't save, who don't have enough money to get by every week, every month, I would say, and this exists, so it's not really a magic wand. There are over £20 billion of unclaimed benefits, so that people have access to, they are entitled to, and there are benefits calculators that can help people find that money. So I would say that every financial services provider should have a better way to get a benefits calculator to people who might benefit from it, because sometimes it's finding people an extra £400 a month. If you can't afford to feed your family, fully every month, and there's lots of research on this, but over 20 billion, hundreds of pounds a month in money that should be yours, but the system to access it is very complicated. Again, we've been talking about forms. The system of applying, waiting, sending in information about yourself, filling in what your income is and how all of that works, I think is probably not designed for some of the people who could benefit most. So how do we get benefits calculators into every journey to get that money into the hands of people who can't save would be one. The magic one for people who won't save, or they've got that income but they're probably not putting it in a place where they can get the most of it, would be, I think, just how do we design it better? Like, how do we have all providers thinking, who haven't we spoken to? Who might have a different view on this? They say, there's no monopoly on good ideas. Kind of a good idea can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
How do we think, instead of this room or our team of people who we've worked for 10 years together and we all kind of think in a similar way, how do you speak to someone different who can bring in and go, actually, we don't like this bit, and it would be better if it was like this? How can we do that more often and more frequently? And with people who are often ignored and not included in those conversations, just so we can really understand and, then design things better.
Great answers. Really thorough, especially on that second one. Well, thanks so much for coming in, Lauren. What have you got planned for the rest of the day? I'm going to think about savings. Good answer.
Practice what you preach. Very good.
Savings into better places.
Good advice for us all.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on Why We Save. If this episode has got you thinking, why not share it with someone else and carry on these conversations we all need to be having? And don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It will help other people find us and mean you never miss an episode.